This is November. It's November 3rd, and we're all and had an extra hour's rest because of the time change, but we're ready to get into the Word of God. And we're going to look at Nehemiah chapter 1 to start with. And this is entitled Nehemiah Before Election 2024. And this is a condensed version. This will be part one. I'll do part two next week and call it Nehemiah after election 2024. And we will be, these are, again, are condensed versions of what I did when we studied the Babylonian captivity, which is on our YouTube account. If you go to faithfulstewards.com, go to our YouTube account and hit playlist, there's the playlist from the Babylonian captivity. And I think the 6th and 7th teaching deals with Nehemiah. And since this is a Sunday morning, rather than a seminar, I condensed them both a little bit, and I can talk a lot faster. Well, maybe not, but anyway, Nehemiah 1:1 is where we'll start. And the words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah, and it came to pass in the month Kislev. Now, month Kislev is like November, December, right? And it's the 20th year. He was in Shushan, the palace. Now, Nehemiah lived in Shusha, which is one of the 4 palaces of Persia. If you live in a palace, okay, you live in a palace, life's pretty good, all right? So, verse 2, then Hananiah, one of my brethren, came, he and certain men of Judah. So I asked them concerning the Jews that had escaped, which were left of the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said unto me, the remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province, the people who are living there are in great affliction and they're in great reproach, because the wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. You see, Nehemiah received a report on the terrible condition that Jerusalem and Judah were in. The people there were in great trouble. They were in reproach. But he was aware that the Babylonians had attacked the country and the city of Jerusalem and had broken down the wall of the city and destroyed the gates with fire. But that had happened 140 years ago. Okay? The news that the walls and the gates had been torn down again was probably something that happened recently. Right? They may have been restored at the time of the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, who finished the restoration of the temple. Then Ezra had gotten there to Jerusalem 13 years earlier from this time frame. And it seemed that when he was there, Ezra makes a comment about the walls still standing at that time. In a prayer, Ezra refers to the fact that the walls were still there. You can check that in Ezra 9:9 and Ezra 5:9. So this is a new development. He's checking to see how things are progressing. The temple had been rebuilt, but something had happened and all the walls were destroyed again. So it came to pass in verse 4, when I heard these words, that I sat down and wept, and I mourned certain days, and I fasted, and I prayed before the God of heaven. The horrific news had a deep, pronounced effect on Nehemiah. He wept, he mourned, he turned to God in prayer. He fasted first, rather than even before him to go see the great king. It's Artaxerxes, who's the king. Now, I'm going to read you Psalm 118, 8 and 9, because these are probably 2 verses that Nehemiah may have considered. Psalm 118, 8, it is better to trust, it's the word shelter. It is better to shelter in the Lord than to put confidence in man, or it's better to shelter in the Lord than put government in princes, which means the government. So trusting mankind or trusting the government, it's better to put your shelter in the Lord. I could probably get an amen on that. Nehemiah investigated and Nehemiah evaluated the situation honestly and identified the need. The walls of Jerusalem were torn down. They needed to be rebuilt for protection purposes. Drones hadn't been invented yet. Recognition of the need, though, is the first step. Nehemiah, as the king's cupbearer, had an honorable position of responsibility. All his needs would have been provided. If he chose to get involved in this great need in Jerusalem, he would probably be moving from the comfort of a palace to a place of hardship that was now a pile of rubble. His life would change dramatically. Look, if you're the king's cupbearer, you get to eat the food the king's going to eat. So what do you think he got to eat all the time? It could be poisonous. Yes, that's true. But he ate and drank very good, very well. He ate as well as the king did, okay? That was his job. Okay. And he was still alive, so I guess nobody tried to poison the king. But he recognized that he would need much divine intervention. God's help would be paramount to his success. There are at least 11 times that are recorded that Nehemiah prayed to God. Later, he would realize that the greatest motivation for rebuilding the broken walls would be a desire to bring glory and honor to God. Nehemiah 1:5. And he said, I beseech thee, O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God that keeps covenant and mercy for them that love him and observe his commandments. God backs up his word. We heard that manifestations. This God is great. This God is awesome. He is faithful to keep his covenant of love that he has made in the past. We'll continue verse 6, but Deuteronomy 7:21 tells us that thou shalt not be frightened at them, for the Lord thy God is among you, a mighty God, an awesome God. So this is what he's bringing up. He's saying, God, you're a great and awesome God. All right. So this is what he read from Deuteronomy 7:21. So after reminding, one of the first things you see a lot of times when these guys pray to God is, God, you're incredible. You got great power, great understanding, great knowledge. You're the best. You're the most wonderful. Oh, by the way, I need something. After reminding God how great he is, he brings up what God had done in the past for his people. And now finally, he's asking God to hear the prayer of his humble servant. Nehemiah 1:6. Let thine ear now be attentive. Oh, please listen, God. Let your eyes be open, your ears open, that thou may hear the prayer of your servant, which I pray before thee now. And I've been praying it day and night. But it's on behalf of the children of Israel, thy servants. And confess, he's going to confess the sins of the children of Israel, which he's putting himself in here. We have sinned against thee. Both, me, my father's house, all of the children of Israel, we've all sinned. We have dealt very corruptly against thee. That's why we're in captivity. And we have not kept the commandments, nor the statutes, nor the judgments, which thou commanded thy servant Moses. Now, this is after they're free to go back to Jerusalem, but a lot of them haven't yet. So Nehemiah could have blamed the Babylonians for the destruction of Jerusalem. It's their fault. He could have blamed God. It's your fault. He may have wondered why God had not sent someone else to build the walls. Instead, he acknowledged that all that had happened was because of their rebellion against God. He confesses the sins of his people, his family sins, and his own sin in not keeping God's law. Nehemiah's willingness to identify with the failings of his people is one of the keys to his effectiveness. All genuine great leaders always stand with their people, especially during difficult times. They accept responsibility for their people's failures. That's just one of the prices of leadership. Verse 8. Remember, I beseech thee, the word that thou commandest thy servant Moses, saying, so he's going to remind him again. How did he know this? He went to the scriptures and he read them. He saw the scrolls. Look, this is what you said to Moses. If you transgress, I'm going to scatter you abroad among the nations. But, which had already happened, but if you turn unto me and keep my commandments and do them, though they were of you cast out into the uttermost part of heaven, yet will I gather from thee thence and will bring them unto the place that I have chosen to set my name there. And we know from Ezekiel 36:19-28 that he chose Jerusalem. He says, I'm going to pick a place and that's where I'm going to live specifically. So you could identify with that. And that became Jerusalem. Okay. The destruction of Jerusalem was not just a reproach to the people of God, but also a reproach to God, who had chosen that place to put his name there. Since the destruction of Jerusalem was a dishonor to the name of God, the rebuilding of the city would bring honor and glory back to God. Nehemiah now had a specific request for God. This is a great key in praying. Find the promise in the scriptures that meets your need and bring it before God. If you want a dynamic prayer life, the Word of God needs to be the foundation for all requests. Today, all the many promises in God's Word that have been made available are in or through Christ, right? Colossians 3:23, do it heartily unto the Lord, whatever it is. All right, verse 10. Now these are thy servants. He's right. God, these are your people. They're your servants. They're your people, whom you hast redeemed by the great power and by your strong hand. O Lord, I beseech thee, let not thy ear be attentive to the prayer of thy servant and to the prayer of thy servants who desire to fear thy name and prosper, I pray thee, thy servant this day, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man, for I was the king's cupbearer. So Nehemiah reminds God that these were his servants, these were his people, and whom he had redeemed from the slavery in Egypt. Today we stand before God our Father as his children. We are redeemed from sin, and we have been delivered from this present evil world. Our citizenship's in heaven now. We have to continue to remember that. Nehemiah 2:1 now. So, came to pass in the month Nisan, 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before him. So, Nehemiah had to sample the wine to make sure it was good. And so he gave it to the king. All right. Now, I had not been before the king sat in his presence. All right. We're 4 months later. 4 months later, after Nehemiah had received the news about the condition of Jerusalem. But his sorrow had not diminished. No one was to appear in the king's presence with sorrow. The king usually would not tolerate it and could put one to death for offending him. Instead of punishment, he asked Nehemiah, why are you sad? This is unusual for a king to show such interest in the welfare of a servant, especially now he's going to come with the insight of it being sorrow of heart. Verse 2, wherefore the king said unto me, why is your countenance sad? Saying, you're not sick. This can be nothing but sorrow of heart. And you know what? Nehemiah was so afraid. He got called out on this one. All right, you're not supposed to be there like that. But the king recognized it's sorrow of heart, and he said, "O king, live forever." That's what you got to tell the king. Oh, live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad when the city, the place of my father's sepulchres, it lies waste? The gates thereof, the consumed with fire. Verse 4 then the king said unto him, off with your head. No, look what this king says. For what dost thou make request? What can I do on your behalf to solve the problem? I'm only king over 127 different lands. I'm not sure if he still was that, but that's how big the empire was. What can I do? So what does Nehemiah do? He prays to God for the correct answer in this situation. So after explaining his sorrow, the king asked for more details of what would be needed. Nehemiah asked God for the answers rather than trying to figure it out for himself. It's going to be God's plan, not Nehemiah's anyway, since God has put the desire and plan in his heart. And we'll read that in a verse here later. Nehemiah asked for permission from the king. All right, God, this is what I need, king. I got to go and oversee the rebuilding of the city walls of Jerusalem. God, he must have had the cringe too. His heart's there. He wants to do it. But boy, you talk about change of lifestyle. Verse 5. That's like moving from Pueblo to Florida or something. Verse 5. And I said to the king, if I please the king, and if thy servant had found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldst send me unto Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build it. I need to go. He's not requesting that the king go and build it. I need to go. All right? I got to go. Well, let me ask a question. How many of you who are cupbearers know anything about rebuilding a city? It's kind of like outside the ability. If God calls us to do something, though, we must trust that he will enable us to accomplish the work. If we stick with his counsel, he will give us whatever is necessary to carry it out. And if you want confirmation of that, you can read 2 Corinthians 3:4-6. Now, verse 6. So here's what the king says to me. The queen also sitting by him, how long shall thy journey be? When wilt thou return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. This is critical. See, first off, this queen, just as foreign wives of Solomon influenced Solomon, so he turned his heart away from the true God. So Queen Esther must have influenced Artaxerxes. This is not Queen Esther, though. This, from what I was able to work through, that's all I used to thought it was. Artaxerxes was Queen Esther's son, so she's the grandmother, but she had influence on Artaxerxes, the queen, and in turning their hearts to show favor unto the ones who serve the true God. Esther knew what it was like. She influenced her son and her son's wife to do God's will. So just like Solomon's wives influenced what was going on in his life, here grandmother's got an influence in their life. Verse 7. Moreover, I said unto the king, if it please the king, all right, this is what I need, king. If it pleases you, I need letters. I need documents be given to me so I can take it to the governors who are beyond the river, so that they may convey me over till I come unto Judah. I need safe passage to Judah. And I need a letter unto Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, the king's orchard, the king's park. And what I need from him is I need timber. I got it. I got to get timbers to make beams for the gates of the palace, for the gates of the fortress of the temple. I need wood. I need beams, which appertain to the house, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall enter into. And the king granted me according to the good hand of God upon me. God's getting the glory here because of God's working in this situation. See, Nehemiah requests letters for secure passage signed by the king. I mean, he's moving from, Persia to Jerusalem. He's going to encounter enemies. And only a document with the king's signature would ensure safe passage. Well, the king told me to tell you. No. He had to have documents with the signet ring on them. Next, he asked for specific building materials that would be necessary to accomplish the rebuild. He recognized the king only granted him such favor because the gracious hand of God was upon him. The king's letters would amount to passports, violation of which would elicit his swift and severe reprisal. In other words, I'm here on behalf of the king. Okay, what do you need? Get going. The king gave Nehemiah over and above what he asked, and he's even going to send armed guards to accompany him. This kind of looks like Ephesians 3:20 to me. Verse 9. Then I came to the governors beyond the river, and I gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent captains of the army and horsemen with me. So here it is. They're coming into town on horseback, and they're bringing wagons filled with beams, and they've got the right paperwork. And I'm sure that people treated them along the way very well. All right. However, when Sanballat, the Horonite, and Tobiah, the servant, he's an Ammonite, when they heard what was going on, here is their reaction. These are the local politicians in that area who are doing quite well off of many wrongs to the people. When they heard about it, it grieved them exceedingly that there was come a man to seek the welfare of the children of Israel. They were exceedingly grieved because a righteous man, somebody who was coming not for his own benefit, but was there to seek the welfare of God's people, the children of Israel. The Apostle Paul had to deal with a few adversities like this. When he was in Ephesus, he wrote back to Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 16:9. He talked about what was going on in Ephesus, and he said, for a great door and effectual, a great and powerfully active door is open unto me. I got a door to move through, and there are many adversities. Same thing today, many adversaries, but we keep moving with whatever doors God's opened. It would soon, back to Nehemiah 2:11, he hadn't told anybody. He gets there and he hadn't told anybody about God's plan yet. Because first, he needed to assess the damage. Nehemiah 2:11 and 12, I came to Jerusalem, and I was there for 3 days. And with all of this equipment, with all the, everything that he has, and he would get up in the middle of the night. I rose in the night, I took a couple of men with me, and I didn't tell anybody what what my God had put in my heart. I'd tell anybody what God's will is in this situation, what I was there to do at Jerusalem. And I didn't bring any other extra beasts with me, just the one I was riding. Verse 16. And the rulers knew not whether I went or what I did. This was the middle of the night. Neither had I as yet told it to the Jews. Can you imagine the speculation that was going on? I didn't tell the priests. I didn't tell the nobles. I didn't tell the rulers. I didn't tell anybody else who was going to, about the work that we were going to do. So Nehemiah spent 3 days surveying the destruction to assess the need. He needed to be a man of vision as he viewed the piles of the crumbled stones that were there, and that those piles of stones were going to be the walls of the city. Instead of heaps of ashes, he had to visualize the new gates. He saw things that others could not see. He had a vision because God put it in his heart. Verse 17 and 18 now. Then said I unto them, all right, you got them all together. You see the distress that he wasn't in distress before, but he is now, that we, God's people, are in. How Jerusalem lies waste, the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come now, let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach. Then I told them of the hand of my God. I told them that the hand of my God, which was good upon me. In other words, I got the Spirit from God, and he tells me and gives us direction. Not everybody had that. And also the king's words that the king had spoken unto me. So he tells them, God's on our side, the king's on our side, and they said, let's get going. Let's rise up and start building. So they strengthened their hands for this in other words, they began the good work. Nehemiah needed the Spirit from God to accomplish such a monumental undertaking, to oversee the work of rebuilding the wall and the gates of the city. He exhorts them that they rise up and rebuild together as they look to God. He showed how the hand of God was upon his life. Sometimes the most difficult part of a job is to get started. Aren't you? But these people, they had a mind to work. They're like, great, God's on our side, king's on our side. Let's start building. It's going to help us in the long run. What are we going to do? Verse 19. But when Sanballat, the Horonite, and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem, the Arabian, when they heard it, they laughed us to scorn. They despise us. They're like, what is this thing they do? Are they going to try and rebel against the king? And then I answered to them and said unto them, the God of heaven. You want to bring it out? The God of heaven. He's going to prosper us. Therefore, we, his servants, we will arise, we will build, but you will have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem. You understood whose enemy he was right away. Most building projects require many people to be involved in the process. Now, the next chapter reveals how each person or family were given specific functions to perform. This list consists of many who would not usually do this type of work. So we'll start with the high priest. How's that? He's not usually a carpenter. Nehemiah 3:1. And Eliashib, the high priest, remember that guy, because it's not going to be good next week when he comes back up again. He's the high priest. He rose up with his brethren. He rose up with other priests. And what did they do? They built the sheep gate. They sanctified it. They set the doors of it. Verse 2 talks about men of Jericho. Verse 5 is an interesting one. And he says he's got the Tekoites, and they repaired part of it. But look at this next part of the verse. But their nobles put not their necks to the work of their Lord. They were part of Israel, but the nobles, they wouldn't work. They would put not their necks to the work of the Lord. They're prospering right there. They're outside the will of God, but they're prospering. They're nobles. We got good things going here. We don't want somebody like this to, take care of the common people, for God's sake. Verse 8, we got goldsmiths in there. We got apothecaries who are working on the wall. Verse 9, we got a ruler of half part of Jerusalem. And verse 12, we got a ruler of the other half part of Jerusalem. Guess what? In verse 12, though, him and his daughters. His daughters. We got goldsmith. Apothecaries are perfumers. These are professions who do not normally do this kind of work. One of the rulers of Jerusalem and his daughters out there working. Verse 17, we got Levites. Verse 28, we got priests, more priests, men of the plain. 32, we bring in the goldsmiths again, and we bring in the merchants. Levites and rulers and priests and goldsmiths and perfumers and merchants. The guys who normally sold the t-shirts and ran the stores now are hard at work rebuilding the wall. Nehemiah 4, verse 1. And it came to pass that when Sanballat heard that we builded the wall, he was wroth. He took great indignation, and he mocked the Jews. And he spake before his brethren, and he spake before the army of Samaria. And he said, Samaria is where Israel, the northern part of Israel, that's where they live, Samaria. And he's speaking to the host of the people that are there and the army. What do these feeble Jews? Are they going to fortify themselves now? Are they going to sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burned? Are they, they're going to bring back the Old Testament law and the Old Testament worship and start worshiping the one true God? We can't have that happen. Now Tobiah the Ammonite was by him, and he said, look, even that which they build, if a fox go up, he shall even break down their stone wall. See, the first form of opposition is mockery and ridicule. That is usually enough to discourage most people from finishing any project they start. Satan uses this tactic to demoralize people so that they lose the resolve, they lose the will to continue. You're trying to do what? Oh, what are you wasting your time for? You can't do that. Even a fox would knock the wall down if you try and build it. You don't have any skills. I don't care what YouTube tells you to do. The outside opposition plan of attack was aimed at morale, motives, mission. Utilizing terms like, those feeble Jews, they attacked the morale of the workers. It was an orchestrated attempt to demolish their self-worth and weaken their resolve. Next, Nehemiah's motives are going to be attacked. The opposition leader Sanballat asserted that Nehemiah and his builders were simply doing all of this for themselves. It was for their own profit. And that comes up in 4:2. That it was selfish motives that drove them to want to rebuild. Then came the scoffers, who attacked the very mission behind what moved and motivated Nehemiah towards this goal. They questioned the possibility of his being able to finish the enormous task. When they were mocking the quality of the work, like a fox could knock the wall down, it was an implication that rebuilding the wall would be just too difficult a job for deplorables and people who are garbage to accomplish. Instead of defending themselves against this ridicule, becoming discouraged, Nehemiah and the builders, they looked to God, and then they remained focused on the project that was at hand. Verse 4. Hear, O our God, listen, God, we're despised. Turn the reproach against their own head. Give them for a prey in the land of captivity. Give them. Let them be the ones that are destroyed in this land of captivity. God, cover not their iniquity. Let not their sin be blotted out from before thee. For they have provoked you to anger before the builders. God, take this personally and don't. This is quite a prayer. Don't absolve them. There's no change of heart for them. And then verse 6 says, so built we the wall. And all the wall was joined together unto the half thereof. Why? For the people had a mind to work, to do God's work. They set themselves up to do whatever it is God needed them to do. They had a mind to work. Nehemiah and the people of Israel rebuilt the wall of Jerusalem because the people had a mind to work. Mocking and ridicule did not deter the builders. They did not wait for someone else to do it. They were committed to getting the job done. It was up to them. Now, since their enemies were unable to cause them to faint in their minds, it's time for a different tactic. They're going to conspire together to physically attack them. Again, Nehemiah and those with him, what do? You prayed to God for wisdom, God's wisdom, and God's protection. Verse 7. But it came to pass, remember, he's talking to the army up there in Samaria. Came to pass that when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the wall of Jerusalem was going up and that the breaches began to be stopped, they all were very wroth. And they conspired, all of them together, to come and to fight against Jerusalem so they could hinder it, right? It's going to ruin their plans. It's going to ruin their lifestyles, which was really contrary to godliness. But by God, we can't have this happen. We can't get God back in the middle of things. Prayer is vital, but many times prayer is just the starting place. They prayed to God and then they acted. When we pray and God gives us knowledge and wisdom, then it's up to us to act on what God shows us to do. If we have a mind to work, Nehemiah took action. He's going to take action by setting a watch. He's going to take defensive military maneuvers. And they're only going to be, on for 24 hours a day. Has to be. Never know when the enemy's going to attack. Verse 10. And Judah said, the strength of the bearers of burdens is decayed. Oh, wait a minute. This is Judah. These are the people who are doing the work, supposedly. Some of them. The strength of the bearers of burdens is decayed. There is much rubbish, so that we're not able to build the wall. So, next comes opposition from within. Some of the local Judeans were repeating the talking points that the enemy had been reporting. The workers were complaining. They're too tired to work. Rubbish is piling up so fast. We'll never get the wall completed. Instead of focusing on the task at hand, I hate to say this, but they spoke discouraging words. This encroaching defeatism could pose a greater danger than an army attacking them could. An army that you can see is easier to defend against than one that comes in invisibly from within the ranks. Sometimes those closest to us say well-meaning negative things that can cause us to become discouraged. We just want to quit. If you know it's from God, you keep moving forward. God will keep you energized. Verse 11. And our adversary said, they shall not know, they won't see till we come up in the midst among them. We're going to slay them and cause the work to cease. And it came to pass that when the Jews which dwelt by them came, they said unto us 10 times. They keep repeating 10 times, from all places whence you shall return unto us, that will be upon you. The Judeans who lived near the enemy kept advising us that they planned to attack. They're going to attack us from all directions while we're working. Their enemies continued their threats, and the Judeans living among them kept repeating those talking points, those threats. They probably thought they were helping by repeating the negative, realistic facts, but they were not very useful. Nehemiah and the builders did not have time to listen to such negative words. They just kept working. Verse 13, therefore said I in the lower places behind the wall, and on the higher places I even set the people after their families, with their swords, their spears, their bows, their handguns, their grenades. And I looked and rose up and said to the nobles, and said to the rulers, and said to the rest of the people, what do you got to handle first? Angel 101. Be not afraid of them. Instead, remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and he'll fight for your brother. He'll fight for your sons. He'll fight for your daughters. He'll fight for your wives. He'll fight for your houses. And it came to pass when our enemies heard that it was known unto us. It wasn't going to be a surprise attack anymore, and that their God had brought their counsel to naught, that we returned all of us to the wall, everyone unto his work. When they realized that God had made it all known, God was still on their side, time to go back to work. Nehemiah successfully responded to the negative words that were beginning to produce fear in the builders. But instead of giving up, they returned to the work. There are records in the Bible where negative information produced so much fear that it did stop God's people from acting on the promises of God. You ever hear about the 10 spies? 12 of them went in, 10 of them died because of what they told the people. 2 of them, Caleb and Joshua, said, no, God's on our side. But it affected for the next 40 years what was going to happen. So they listened to the fear outside of the protection of God. Verse 16. It came to pass from that time forth that half of my servants wrought in the work, half of them kept building, and half of them, held, behold, spears, shields, and bows. Right? They showed their military presence. They showed that they were ready for battle. If they were driving by, in their SUVs, they could look up and they could see people armed on the walls all over the place. So there was no surprise anymore. They knew they were going to be in for a fight. They were in for a battle if they chose to attack. They saw all of that. The army was in place to do war, right? So they spears, shields, bows. The Harbigians are coats of mail. They had on their light armor, and the rulers were behind all the house of Judah. They which builded on the wall, and they that bear burdens with those that laid it. Every one with one of his hands wrought in the work. The other hand, he held a weapon. For the builders, every one of them had their sword girded by their side. So I don't know about you, if you ever done any work. I mean, it's like working on a car, Tim, and you got your sword there on your side with you, or you got your machine gun on your back. All right. Every one, which one of his hands had wrought the work, the other hand, he had his weapon. For the builders, everyone had their sword again. They got their sword, and they kept building. And he that sounded the trumpet was by me. And as I said unto the nobles and to the rulers and the rest of the people, the work's great. The work's large. And we're all separated all over the wall from one another. In what place, therefore, if you hear the sound of the trumpet, resort you thither unto us, because our God shall fight for us. So he's got the guy next to him who's going to blow the trumpet. If you hear that, come running. Get ready for a fight, but God's going to fight with us. So we labored in the work. Half of them held the spears. They held the spears from the rising of the morning till the stars appeared. That means for the entire day and into the night, they were prepared for war. Likewise, at the same time said I unto the people, let everyone with a servant, everybody who lives outside of Jerusalem, you stay in Jerusalem at nighttime. You lodge within Jerusalem, that in the night they may be a guard unto us and labor on the day. You don't need to travel. We need to have strength in numbers there. Stay in town. Don't know that more and more people are still there, and you can work on the day easier. And then you're ready in case an attack happens at night. So neither I, nor my brethren, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard which followed me, none of us put off our clothes, except that, saving that everyone put them off for washing. Tuesday's wash day. Take your clothes off. Aside from that, you got your same work clothes on. Nehemiah never left his purpose. He continued to focus on building the wall despite the potential threats of attack. When opposition arises, the temptation is to lose focus on what is most important. You got to stay important on the project. What is the mission? And don't allow yourself to be sidetracked by entering into open competition with those who are attacking you. The opposition was mocking. The opposition was threatening. But Nehemiah kept focused on rebuilding. They despised him. They conspired against him. But the wall kept getting built. It kept rising. Now, when working with a group, divisions from within can often threaten to disrupt the project, especially from those who are not as committed or think they are above the project. Remember we read about the nobles? All right, Nehemiah 5:1. There was a great cry of the people. This part really disgusts you. And there was a great cry of the people and of the wives against their brethren, the Jews. For there were that said, we are sons and our daughters are many. Therefore we take up food for them so we can eat and live. But some also that were that said, we've had to mortgage our lands. We've had to mortgage our vineyards. We had to mortgage our houses so we could buy food because of the famine. There's not as much crops coming in, not as much food. All the Taco Bells are closed. There were also that said, look, we've had to even borrow money to pay the king's tribute, just to pay our taxes. We had to borrow money to pay our taxes that are upon our lands and upon our vineyards. Yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children. And lo, we bring into bondage our sons and our daughters to be servants. And some of our daughters have been brought into bondage already. Neither is it in our power to redeem them. For other men, they now have our lands and vineyards. We're out doing work for God, and we can't pay our bills, and we're having to even sell some of our children to put them into bondage. The wealthier and less committed Judeans, you always have these people, the wealthier and less committed Judeans are taking advantage of the less fortunate brothers. But just to get by, they were selling their land, their vineyards, their houses. Some sent their children to be servants to the more affluent ones. While there was a great need to build the wall, some of the nobles and the rulers saw an opportunity to increase their personal wealth by charging exorbitant interest. One of the reasons Israel had gone into captivity in the first place was because they refused to help the poor and needy, Ezekiel 16:49. Certain nobles and rulers were guilty of the same behavior, and Nehemiah became extremely angry because in charging interest, they were violating the law of God. God set that up in Exodus 22:25. You don't charge your brethren interest, usury. Verse 6. And I was pissed. I was extremely angry when I heard the cry and I heard those words. So, what am I going to do? I'm not going to overreact first. I consulted within myself. And boy, sometimes that's the smartest thing to do. I consulted with myself, and then I rebuked the nobles, I rebuked the rulers, and I said unto them, you exact usury, every one his brother? And I set a great assembly against them. You see all these deplorables out there? We're coming after you if you keep this up. Even though Nehemiah was very angry, he took time to think about it. He took time to talk it over with God before speaking out against the nobles and officials. Then he called a public meeting to deal with the problem, with the result that a great assembly was against them for their greedy actions. When we confront difficult situations where there is strife and division, we cannot let our emotions rule the day. Sometimes it's better to let cooler heads prevail. Get peaceful. Ask for some wisdom from God first. Verse 8, and I said unto them, we after our ability have redeemed our brethren the Jews, which were sold unto the heathen. And will you even sell your brothers? We're bringing people back from the heathens, and we're having to sell our brothers back into them? Or shall they be sold unto us? Then the people who were doing those evil acts, they held their peace, and they found nothing to answer. There was nothing they could say. They knew they were guilty. Also, I said, it is not good that what you're doing. Ought you not to walk in the fear of our God because of the reproach of the heathen, our enemies? Aren't you at least afraid of God? Shouldn't you at least have some respect for God, considering we currently are in the middle of a conflict against ungodly people? And you seem to be only interested in your own well-being? Verse 10. I likewise and my brethren and my servants might exact of them money and corn food. I pray you better leave off this usury. And now also you need to restore, I pray you to them, restore even this day immediately their lands, their vineyards, their olives, and their houses. Also, the 100th part of the money and of the food and the wine and the oil that you exact of them. Then said they, yes, sir, immediately, sir, sorry, sir. We will restore them. We will require nothing of them. So will we do as thou sayest. So I called the priests in, and I took an oath of them that they should do according to this promise. And I shook my lap and said, so God shake out every man from his house and from his labor that performs not this promise. You promised, but you better damn well do it. Even thus be shaken out and emptied. And all the congregation said, amen. And they praised the Lord. And the people did according to this promise. He got the rulers and the nobles to quit acting unjustly and to restore what they had taken from their own people. Divisions between believers certainly will arise. They can either become a severe irritation or they can be completely resolved. the gospel time frame, Jesus kind of gave instructions on how to handle all those conflicts. And you can read that in Matthew 18:15-17. And basically, Matthew 18:15-17, he just says, moreover, if your brother will trespass against thee, go yourself and tell him his fault between you and him alone. Because if he hears you, you gained your brother back. That's what Nehemiah did there. But if he won't hear you, then take with thee one or two more, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And he shall neglect, and if he shall neglect to hear them, then go to the church. You go individually, you bring others as witnesses, and if the person's not going to change about the problem, you just take the matter to the church. But if he neglect to hear the church, then let him be as if he's a heathen man. No good heathen man and publican. All right, Nehemiah 5:14, we're going to close here. Many times, those who feel they have been wronged will complain to everyone else and never talk to the person they have the issue with. This leads to divisions among believers that never get resolved. Over time, such divisions can split fellowships as others feel they have to pick a side. Nehemiah 5:14-15, New International Version. Moreover, from the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, until the 32nd year, so we got 12 years here, neither I nor my brothers, this again in the future, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allotted to the governor. But earlier governors, other people who had been in charge, those who preceded me, they placed a heavy burden on the people, and they took 40 shekels of silver from them, in addition to all the food and wine that they needed. Their assistants also lorded it over the people. But out of reverence for God, I did not act like that. No insider trading for him. This happened later, but is inserted here as more insight into Nehemiah's character. He was the governor appointed by the king. He had the right to claim certain privileges that were afforded him because of that position. And the governors before him had taken full advantage of this privilege. But in the 12 years of him being governor there, Nehemiah gave up his rights and his privileges for the greater good. And that's where we're going to pick up, because verse 16 starts explaining how many different people ate at his table every single day, but he took it out of his personal wealth. So we'll pick that up with next Sunday. Also, the fact that they're going to try and assassinate him. Imagine that.